So from now on, I'm going to wear this hat in every single video until the bear market is over. So yeah, I'm sure by now you guys know what happened already. I've never seen this kind of panic in the crypto space before. So I thought people were fine when Bitcoin dropped from like 30K to 20K, but then now it's gotten really bad where it has broken this 20K support line and people are really starting to panic. So a lot of it has to do with this rule that Bitcoin has never dropped below the previous all-time high in the previous cycle before. So in case you guys didn't know, the previous all-time high of the previous cycle was in 2017, where I think it hit like 19.8 or something K. Right, so it was like right below 20K was the all-time high. Yeah, Bitcoin just dropped below that now. So we have dropped below the previous all-time high, which is something that has never happened before. This was always a chance that it was going to happen. So I said that it was a rule, but it's not really like a rule, like it's not written in the protocol that this can never happen. Like there's always a chance that it could happen. So it's not law. But yeah, it did happen regardless, right? So there has been, as a result, a huge uptick in the amount of trolls and just Bitcoin bears in general that have come out of the woodwork, right? So if you just take a stroll on Twitter or Reddit or anywhere else, that's not like a pro-Bitcoin community. So if you go to anywhere on Reddit besides r/Bitcoin, you'll see that there's like a huge uptick of people just be like, oh, see, Bitcoin was a scam. People in general just, even celebrating the fact that other people are losing money, which I find kind of dirty, but whatever, right? Like people on the internet are going to do whatever they want. Right now I figured though, is a good time to kind of reiterate my bullish thesis again. I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin specifically, which is my biggest holding in crypto. But, a lot of these concepts also apply to other cryptos as well. And keep in mind, I do have a sizable position in Ethereum as well, and very small positions in other coins. But I don't have time to talk about everything, right? So today, we're just going to focus on Bitcoin and why I think, at least for me, I'm still bullish on Bitcoin and why I think that the future is still bright for Bitcoin. By extension the crypto industry as well, but it might take some time. And then also we're going to talk about some counter arguments, and I'm going to present my counter arguments to some of the stuff that people online are saying. I'm also going to answer some questions that people have been asking me. Right. So lastly, though, I will also share my non-financial advice and tell you guys where I think that Bitcoin is headed from here. I say non-financial advice because this is just my opinion, and don't invest using this using my opinion, right? So I'm just sharing my thoughts. First, though, let's talk about my bullish thesis again. So I did actually make a full video about this, and this was quite a long time ago. I think this was over a year ago by now. I won't go through every single point of the bullish thesis, but I'll just go through part of it, right? So it all goes back to a principle that I call the axiom of money, which states that for any form of money to have value, work must be expended to create more of it. So that's a mouthful. Let me say that again, right? So for any form of money to have value, work must be expended to create more of it. So in other words, the reason why people use gold for thousands of years as money instead of, let's say, I don't know, rocks or something, is because if we use rocks as money, anyone can just go outside, pick up a rock and exchange it for goods and services, right? So the effort needed to gather up like a bag of rocks is fairly minimal. But if we're talking about gold, first of all, gold is rare, so you have to go out and find it. And once you do find it, it's often buried deep underground or in hard to reach places. So I have to mine it. And then it's also most likely it's not going to be pure gold right out of the ground, right? It's going to be gold ore. So you have to purify it, refine it, and cast it into bars and coins. And then you have to transport it around. So all of that takes enormous amounts of efforts to make a gold coin from just extracting ore from the ground. right? So if we evaluate paper money, i.e., fiat money, right, so government issued money, against this axiom, you see that fiat money actually fails this test, right? Because what central banks have been doing for decades and decades, and this is not just United States, Canada, this is like pretty much every country around the world, is that central banks have been printing money out of thin air, right? So no work was expended to create that money. What is the result of this, though? What does that mean, right? So as a result, the money supply, so the total amount of, let's say, dollars keeps going up, right? So the amount of dollars that exists keeps going up, and if there's a larger amount of dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services, well, then what happens to the value of each dollar, right? It's going to go down, because think about it. If there's $100 in the system, and $100 is, chasing like a certain number of goods, but then I 10x the money supply, and now there's 1,000. Well, there's still the same amount of goods and services. The price of like all the goods and services are just going to go up, right? So, AKA, this is called inflation. So Bitcoin is a hedge against money printing. This is because Bitcoin relies on a method called proof of work, and also you can think of this as just Bitcoin mining, as is commonly referred to generate more Bitcoin. And in order to mine Bitcoin, massive amounts of electricity must be expended. So it's not a trivial matter to acquire more Bitcoin. It's actually very difficult to acquire more Bitcoin. So this matters because if you're an individual, or even if you're the government, if you have debt that's due in Bitcoin, then you better have the Bitcoin ready to pay the debt, or else you're going to default, right? Because you can't just snap your fingers and make more Bitcoin out of thin air. Because it's, as I said, you need the electricity, you need to mine it, right? So, or you need to actually trade some other good or value with somebody that already has Bitcoin, and get somebody to sell you that Bitcoin, right? So, versus if this debt was in fiat money, let's say, and you're the government and you have access to the money printer, well, then you can just print more fiat out of thin air and then pay the person who you owe, right, to pay back the debt. So Bitcoin has it written into the code that it is limited to 21 million Bitcoin, and that supply is hard capped, meaning that there could never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. This makes Bitcoin extremely scarce. Because if you think there's almost 8 billion people in the world, right, and there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. And people say 21 million Bitcoin all the time. It's actually the circulating supply that's out there right now. It's actually only about 19 million, right? So the other 2 million are not going to be mined until 2140. So yeah, we're probably all going to be, everyone watching this video is probably all going to be long gone by the time that 2140 rolls around, right? So yeah, there's only 19 million Bitcoin out there right now, and there's like almost 8 billion of us, so you do the math, right? So again, this makes Bitcoin extremely scarce. So not only is it scarce, it's also what's called provably scarce, meaning that you can actually look at the code and mathematically prove that this is the case, that it's hard capped, right? So gold is not provably scarce. Gold might be scarce, but it's not provably scarce because we don't actually know how much gold there is out there in the world. So there's always a chance we find a new gold mine somewhere, right? So if we find a new gold mine somewhere, then that's going to increase the supply of gold that's out there. Or even if we don't find any new gold mines, gold miners can always adjust the rate at which they're digging gold out of the ground, versus with Bitcoin, the issuance rate, meaning that the new Bitcoin that's being issued is also algorithmically determined. So no matter how hard you try to mine it, you can't mine Bitcoin faster, right? Because the block times are set to 10 minutes, and the difficulty just adjusts if your if your hash power is too high. But yeah, anyways, I'm getting a little bit too technical. Just bear with me here. So again, I am telling you all of this because a lot of people have been saying that Bitcoin is not an inflation hedge. Look at what it's doing, right? It's behaving like a tech stock when inflation is going sky high right now. Bitcoin's going down, right? Well, yes, that is true. In the short term, I have to agree with you, right? It's not an inflation hedge. in the short term. It behaves more like a tech stock and a risk-on asset rather than an inflation hedge. But I would recommend those who think this way to zoom out a little bit more and look at the long term, right? So in its total lifetime, or just look at any time period over the course of 4 or 5 years or more, over like a longer time horizon. If you look at how many satoshis a dollar was worth, say like 5, 10 years ago, and compare that to now, you see that dollars have gone down significantly against Bitcoin, right? So it is a hedge against inflation in that sense over the long term, right? Just not on a day-to-day basis. So keep in mind that Bitcoin is relatively new. So it was invented in 2009. So I think that the people who are complaining that Bitcoin has failed in terms of its goals of being an inflation hedge, they're making that judgment a little bit prematurely, right? So it's like in 2007 when the iPhone first came out, right? And let's just say like the iPhone comes out and then people look at it and go, oh, it's a failure because it can't do any like virtual reality, augmented reality stuff. Well, Bitcoin is not going to be like the global store of value and magically like be the best inflation hedge like the day after it was invented or even like years after it was invented, right? It's going to take time for adoption to kind of catch up, for people to get in this space. It's going to take time, right? It's kind of like in the beginning, it will kind of behave like a tech stock, like the way that it is right now, right? So yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense that people are seeing it as a growth stock because it's in that like rapid growth phase, right? So kind of like think of like an early internet, right? So you can't expect the internet to solve all your problems if you're living in like 1990, right? So it's going to take time for that technology to catch up and for adoption to catch up. So in terms of counter arguments, I see a lot of people who still say that Bitcoin is just a pure speculation vehicle and not an investment, right? So to that, I have to say that, in my opinion, it can be both, right? So if you're going to make the argument that Bitcoin is only used for speculation, well, let me ask you what can't be used as speculation, right? You can actually speculate on anything, right? So people speculate all the time on real estate, they speculate on gold, they speculate on commodities, they speculate on stocks, and they even speculate on bonds. Yes, bonds. So the bonds that are out there right now, most of them yield less than inflation, right? So if you buy a bond and inflation is super high and the inflation is higher than what the bond yields, if you hold it to maturity, you actually lose money, right? So in order to so why would people buy bonds in that case, right? They buy it so that they can trade it around. So, if the bond price goes up, they just sell it. They don't hold it to maturity, right? So people trade bonds and make a lot of money from it, actually, right? So without ever the intention of holding it to maturity. So that's kind of speculative as well, right? Because you're speculating that the price will go up with the bond. So it's anything can be used for speculation is my point, right? So you have to also separate Bitcoin with other crypto, in my opinion, because people don't really understand crypto, right? So for people who don't understand crypto, people tend to think that Bitcoin is the same as, say, like a Dogecoin. And are they the same thing? Well, they're both crypto, right? First of all. So, to the layman, it might seem like there's no difference between, let's say, a Bitcoin and a Dogecoin. They're both cryptocurrencies. Well, that's just as ridiculous of an argument as saying that GME stock is the exact same as Berkshire Hathaway because they're both stocks, right? So that doesn't actually make sense. And I think that people are in general being a little bit unfair to Bitcoin as well. So Bitcoin is down around 75% right now from peak to now. So peak was back in November of 2021. I think it hit like 68 to 69K. And yeah, it's down about 75% from there. And as a result, a lot of people are saying that, oh, it's a scam, it's going to go to zero, blah, 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 right? But let me just show you this. So on a 1-year basis, the Purpose Bitcoin ETF, which is a Canadian ETF that tracks Bitcoin 1-to-1, is a spot ETF. It has actually outperformed a lot of our favorite tech stocks like Shopify, Zoom, Netflix, Peloton, etc. Right? So I don't see a wave of people bashing Shopify and like Netflix and saying that Shopify is a scam and Shopify is going to go to zero, right? It's very easy for one to throw out the word scam because it captures your attention, right? But I understand that there are a lot of scams in the crypto space, but let me just focus on Bitcoin for now and forget the hundreds of dog coins that are out there that will probably actually go to zero, right? So let's just talk about Bitcoin. So you can speculate on Bitcoin and you can trade it to make a quick buck if you're lucky, or if you really believe in the technology and you have a bullish thesis on it, and you think that this is going to be like the new decentralized monetary layer of the world, you can buy it and hold it, right? And the keyword is hold and not trade. So if you hold it, are you speculating on it, or do you have a bullish thesis that you're actually, trying to invest in, right? So does that count as investing? And I know a lot of you are going to say, hey, but stocks have fundamentals, right? Bitcoin does not. So therefore, you can't invest in Bitcoin because there's no fundamentals. I would actually disagree with that argument as well. So my argument is that Bitcoin does have fundamentals. You just have to open your mind to the idea that fundamentals are not always just your price to earnings, price to sales ratios, and free cash flows and all of that, right? So for instance, how much hashing power is being inputted into the Bitcoin network. You can think of this as computing power that the miners are putting in, right? So the amount of guesses per second to the SHA-256 algorithm, right? So to try and get the next block confirmed. So the amount of electricity that's being used, now that is a fundamental quantifiable measure that you can look at, right? So the higher the hash power, the more secure the network is. And as I said, the electricity being expended to mine Bitcoin is a non-trivial matter, right? So as in, electricity costs money and is valuable, right? So that value is what's backing Bitcoin. It's part of what's backing Bitcoin, right? And how about the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, right? So you have a network of tens of thousands of nodes spread all across the world. And that's also a number that you can quantify, right? You can look up how many nodes there are out there. How about the amount of value moved on the Bitcoin network per day, right? You can measure this in Bitcoin, or you can measure this in US dollars, right? And that's also a quantifiable measure. So I think it's a little bit unfair to say that Bitcoin doesn't have fundamentals just because it doesn't have the same ratios and stuff that you're used to looking at with stocks, right? So you just got to think outside the box a little bit when it comes to looking for fundamentals for Bitcoin. So that's my counter argument to that, right? So lastly, the last part of this video, I want to tackle some questions that have been asked. So number one is, can Bitcoin death spiral like Luna, right? So a lot of people are concerned about after what happened to Luna with the collapse of like a $40 billion project pretty much overnight, right? So a lot of people are concerned that can the same thing happen to Bitcoin? Number two, where do I think that Bitcoin is going from here? And number three is kind of related. When will Bitcoin rebound, right? So I'm going to answer that question as well. And lastly, last question, am I going to buy more Bitcoin? I think you guys already kind of have a feeling what my answer is going to be, but let's save that for the end. First, can Bitcoin death spiral like Luna? So the short answer is no. So this is the beauty of Bitcoin. It's actually built specifically against death spiraling. That's why it exists in the first place, right? So in case you forgot what happened to Luna, with Luna, they have this stable coin system where they have to mint more Luna coins to back USD's peg against the US dollar. So because of that, there's no cap to the amount of Luna that can be minted. And what happens is that if the UST to USD peg starts to depeg, then you're going to have this death spiral where more and more Luna coins are being created, right? So Bitcoin is, first of all, not a stablecoin project, so you don't have to worry about it having like a stablecoin peg, right? So that doesn't exist with Bitcoin. And as I said, Bitcoin is hard capped to 21 million. So the rate at which new Bitcoin created is also called the issuance rate, is also set in the protocol itself. So, every 10 minutes, a new block gets confirmed, and right now the block reward is 6.25 Bitcoin per block. So it's nice and simple, right? Like there's no way to speed up that block time because if there's too much hashing power, then the difficulty automatically adjusts, right? So it'll always aim to make the block times 10 minutes. So it's slow and steady, and then you have no chance of it being death spiral because it's all limited, right? So second, where do I think that Bitcoin is going from here? Well, in previous cycles, Bitcoin fell about 85% from peak to bottom. So as I said, right now we're about 75% from peak to now. So it could drop maybe 10% more from like where the top is as measured from the top. That would put us around the 10K range, which I know sounds really scary, and that's really low, right? So I really don't think we're gonna drop quite that low, but never say never, right? I really don't think we're gonna hit like 4 digits or anything, but if we do, then I think that will be the bottom for reals. But again, you never know, right? Like it's so hard to predict what Bitcoin's gonna do, right? So to be honest, I have no idea, but I don't think that it's gonna quite drop that low, right? So next, when will Bitcoin rebound, in my opinion? So for this one, I really do think that we have to wait for the Fed to pivot, right? And what I mean by that is that the Federal Reserve of the U.S., they're going to have to go from hawkish, right, like raising interest rates, to lowering interest rates, or at the very least, pausing interest rate hikes. So that way we can have more money flowing back into the market again, and especially into risk-on assets like Bitcoin and tech stocks and growth stocks and all that stuff, right? And the rest of crypto as well. So as to when I think that might happen, I think it's going to take probably 6 to 12 months. So maybe before the end of the year, but definitely I think sometime early 2023 is when it'll happen. As I was saying before, the natural tendency of interest rates is to go down and trend towards zero. And this is because the government is the biggest borrower of money, right? So that means that every time they increase the interest rates, they're actually shooting themselves in the foot because the government has to pay more interest on their debt. And eventually they're not going to be able to keep that up, right? So if we're talking about the U.S. Specifically, the U.S. total debt is around $30 trillion, right? So yeah, 30 trillion, that's like a mind-boggling large amount, right? So right now the federal funds rate is at 1.5%, and I think once it goes past like 3, so double from what it is by now, I think the government is gonna really start to feel the pain, and they'll be probably forced to stop at that point. Right, so yeah, as I said, end of the year, maybe early 2023. So we'll have like 6 to 12 months, I think, to accumulate, shares of risk on stocks or Bitcoin or crypto in general. So lastly, am I buying more Bitcoin? So I think that Will Clemente, who is a Bitcoin analyst, put it the best. He said, if your long-term Bitcoin investment thesis changes because of the price, you never understood Bitcoin. So my investment thesis on Bitcoin has not changed. In fact, the thesis has gotten even stronger, in my opinion. When I first got into Bitcoin in 2020, it's gotten even better from there. So one thing that I've noticed is that people who are really critical of Bitcoin, if you actually ask them if they understand Bitcoin, you'll find that they don't, right? Like they'll admit it too at some point if you ask hard enough, right? Like if you ask like, can you explain actually how Bitcoin works before you call it a scam or before you call it, the next tulip mania, like do you actually understand the technology, right? And they'll say no. So from a technology and economics perspective, I haven't really found any Bitcoin critics that really understand both of those aspects. and both, the technological and economic implications of Bitcoin. I haven't found someone who understood both of those aspects and is still against it. So I know this is an emotional time in the industry, and I want you to go back about 8 months to November 2021 when Bitcoin was at an all-time high, and remember how people were saying, oh man, I wish I bought Bitcoin in March 2020 when it crashed through the floor and hit like 4,000 or something like that. So this just goes to show, if you're panicking right now, like 90% of people that I see on Twitter are, then you probably would not have bought Bitcoin at 4K, right? So yeah, it's like, are you really gonna buy Bitcoin when everything's crashing through the floor? Like, now's your chance, right? And it's like, no, you wouldn't buy it now, and you wouldn't have bought it back then. But yeah, if you actually understand it though, I think that this is probably a pretty great opportunity to pick up some cheap Bitcoin, because right now we're going through another capitulation event. Yeah, again, here's where the money is made, right? So I think there's a famous saying, I forget who said it, but you don't make money when you sell a stock. You make money when you buy a stock. I'm going to extend it to crypto as well, right? So for something like Bitcoin, I would argue it's a similar story where you don't make money when you sell Bitcoin. You make money when you buy Bitcoin, right? So yes, I am buying Bitcoin. I'm buying more Bitcoin, just to put it explicitly. In fact, I'm increasing my allocation to Bitcoin. And I think that, again, bull markets make you money and bear markets make you rich. So yeah, that's it for this video. It's a pretty long one, so I'll leave it here. Be sure to give me a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing if you like this series. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, links down below in the description as always. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.